be at the old, it would remain at the old value, correct? Any additional incremental, would that be included if they were to do a tear down?
No, so it'd be new construction. New construction is abated 100%.
Okay.
So if you did a tear down, you would have a 15-year abatement on property taxes for the new construction.
Okay. So all that does is add value to the existing homeowner's
You still pay the
properties.
base rate, yes.
You would still pay.
So it's the increment that would be tax-free. It's similar to down on Kenwood Road a couple years ago. The city of Blue Ash did an abatement for 8 years on property taxes for the new construction. The baseline taxes still flow through, but the other property taxes are abated for 8 years. It's the 4 new houses just about half a mile down on
Yep.
Kenwood Road there. One thing about the residential side, it's a little different than commercial. You actually apply for the abatement after you construct it. Commercial, you have to apply before you turn your first shovel of dirt. Residential is after the improvements.
Post. Okay. So all this really does is adds additional value to those homeowners that are somewhat affected by the, because if you have if you want to sell your home and you've got a tax abatement on there that somebody wants to come in and either knock it down and build a new one, or put an addition on the back of the house, they're gonna get a tax abatement, and there's value to that.
Tom, following up on your reasoning on that, why stop with the third alternative there? In the corner, on the west side of Frolic, those residences are have been threatened and actually are now threatened by commercial development on Galbraith Road. So why, I'm not espousing that this should be done, but your line of thinking would lead you to believe that the larger you make the area, the greater the benefit to the residential neighborhood. So,
Well, I think this is site-specific, so, Jack, so we're not talking, this project really has no effect on those people who live down there by Galbraith Road. So I'm only talking about what this site in particular and what the impact might be from this development on these residences. I mean, heck, we could put the whole neighborhood in there if we
yeah,
wanted.
that's exactly what
But
would happen.
the
if you
question
followed your
is,
thinking.
but the question then is, are we then directing it at being site-specific, and we're really not? Now all of a sudden, we've expanded into something bigger.
But it is site-specific. This wouldn't be, this
I don't
wouldn't be
think, I
before
don't
the
think
board
this,
if it
I don't
wasn't
think
for
this project will
capital
impact those
investment.
people at the corner, at Galbraith at all.
You know?
No, I don't, because there's no access to this project from the backside. So there's no reason for anybody to take that back path. I'm happy to expand it, but I just thought this included those properties that were most impacted by the project. So,
Why wasn't this brought up when this project was approved?
You have to ask the developer that question. This came about, HCDC got involved in this about a month and a half ago.
so the application to ACDC was post-approval. So that's why it wasn't brought up during the public hearing.
Okay,
Is it
what-
public record, is the application public record?
Yes.
Okay, on HCDC's website?
I don't know that there is an application yet. The application occurs once the township does enabling legislation.
But
But
whatever's transpired to have this come before us, is that public record yet?
I would say probably. I mean, the developer has gone to ACDC and made the request, so there's something in writing that
Yeah.
says, yes, we are requesting that, so I'm sure that's public record. Yeah.
I went to their website, I didn't see that they shared it
Yeah,
there.
I don't know if they put it on their website. I mean, if you could probably call them and ask them to send you a copy of it.
The money's gonna be spent, or the abatement taxes are gonna be used for public infrastructure. What is that public infrastructure?
Well, I think that's up to the developer to determine what public infrastructure improvements need to be made and can be funded with this.
Well, the developer's here, I guess he can answer that question if he chooses, but my point is that the requirement, as I recall, was that a traffic signal be installed, that Kenwood Road be widened to some degree. There were other public infrastructure requirements that are zoning that the developer is responsible for. So this is primarily a way for the developer to pay for those costs that he's required to incur as a result of the approval of the project. So it seems to me that we should know what those public infrastructure improvements are gonna be. There's a garage in there as well, that somehow garages always end up being a public infrastructure. So I think we should know how that money's gonna be spent.
You asking me?
Yeah.
What?
I mean,
Doug,
should we be
they always
itemizing
look at you.
those public improvements?
Well, you probably wanna know, but the developers here, you can ask them
Sure.
what the intention is.
Those funds will be used for, as Jack mentioned, all of the public infrastructure, which includes signalization, roadway widening, turn lanes, utilities, public parking garage, which it is, a public parking garage. And so those infrastructure items are what the tax revenues will be used to pay for.
And I should mention that those funds do not cover the entire project's public improvements for the entire project. They only cover a portion of those improvements. So a big share of the cost is still being borne by the developer.
Well, the garage is a big element in that cost. In other words, this is really a tax abatement similar to dozens of tax abatements that exist in Hamilton County, City of Cincinnati, Norwood, and so on, right?
Exactly.
More like
I mean, it's
hundreds.
dressed up to look different, but it basically is a tax abatement for the developer, possibly some homeowners. And those funds are then diverted to improvements or project elements that would normally be the responsibility of a private developer. Correct?
I would say not necessarily.
Well, I mean, that depends.
Yeah.
Typically, you are correct. But I mean, there's a lot of instances where, for instance, that's how the TIF works. It's to cover public improvements that need to be made.
Is the Kenwood area suffering economically that it would need this? Is there a concern about property values?
I really can't hear you, but you said something about, is it?
Well, I'm just wondering, are CRAs used for depressed areas?
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with CRAs. I've always worked on TIFs, so I don't have every answer, and townships don't do
Sure.
them anyway. So,
Yeah.
Greg, perhaps you know what the basis is?
Well, the basis is an area that is in need of economic development, potentially assistance. And there are instances everywhere, you'll find pockets of depressed, and we'll use that term just for lack of a better one, that pockets need economic development assistance to push forward, to continue the economic development activities. You know, one bad seed can ruin a whole bunch, and Kenwood is certainly not immune to it. You know, I've said all along, Kenwood is a cog of different moving parts, anchored by the Kenwood Town Center. The Kenwood Town Center makes the surrounding properties better. Those properties improve and make the Kenwood Town Center better. It's an evolving cycle, and if you don't take care of your cogs, you run the risk of losing the competitive advantage that Kenwood enjoys over everybody else. You've seen what's happened in Norwood, you've seen what's happened in Tri-County, you've seen what's happened in Forest Fair. Situations where the mall was thought to be it, and when the mall faltered, everything else faltered. When everything else faltered, the malls collapsed. And Kenwood is in a position that it can stave off depressions by making sure that it continues moving forward with future developments and growth, and that's the key to the whole thing.
Greg, who said that this is a depressed area? Who made that determination?
HCDC conducted a housing study of the area, and they felt it meets the criteria for a CRA. They're the experts that have the understanding of housing values and housing conditions, and they're the ones that have to push it forward to Ohio Development Services to get approval.
Greg, did you say though that Blue Ash issued the CRA.
It's something similar to a CRA, but the idea was the same. It was to abate the property taxes to spur new economic development, which is the construction of new houses.
Tom? You know, I guess I personally have to do more reading to understand what the CRA is and how ACDC works. But it's really hard to believe that an area where there's a developer who's willing to invest, I guess, Greg, up to $130 million into this area, that it would qualify as economically depressed, or whatever language is used in the legislation. I mean, it defies the imagination that we have a person who's willing to invest that much money before this was ever talked about. So I think that this is somehow the tail that's wagging the dog as we move along here. If it had been described early on, you could maybe think about how the rationales would fit together. But this is really late in the game to come back and decide, after the decisions have been made by private investors and banks and whoever, that now it's economically depressed and it needs additional investment. Just doesn't make sense. It doesn't, you know, it's a 2 + 2 = what? I don't know. It's certainly not 4 in this instance. The rationale is very difficult to follow about why now, and why this now.
Another thing to add to that was, this is down in the depressed area. How long has Capital owned these properties? So they don't have to keep the properties for X amount of time, so then they're run down?
Self-fulfilling
Mr.
prophecy.
Reed?
Yes, yes.
So, you know, Mr. Flume,
They
just,
call me Jack.
you want to call you Mr. Flume? Just so you know and understand, you know, this project from the very beginning was anticipated to have a TIF. Okay, you may or may not know what those are, but it's
I do know
a
what a TIF
financial
is.
incentive. Well, I just saying, you may or may not
I do know.
know what a financial incentives are for public infrastructure. And in fact, almost every major development within Hamilton County and the city of Cincinnati has had that economic boost for the public infrastructure, because the projects generally can't afford the kind of infrastructure that they're being required and asked to provide. In fact, we sat in December with Mr. LaBarber, newly elected trustee, and went through this concept plan and talked to him about the TIF, and went through the whole thing. And at that time, and I have 2 other people that were at that lunch meeting, his response was, "This is great, yeah, and we understand the public infrastructure piece of this and how that works." Mr. LaBarber most recently said that he would not support the TIF, which has always been an integral part of this project. And so the alternative means to accomplish this infrastructure development is through a CRA. And there are hundreds of these throughout the city and the county and the townships. So this is the typical tool that is used to allow the public infrastructure to be completed.
Hey Greg, just one comment. I never said to you, I mean, yeah, you explained it to me, but I never said, hey, I support this, let's go do this. I never said that.
Excuse me,
I never said that to you.
Mr. LaBarber. I don't think we're here to debate that, but there were 3 people besides you at that meeting. And if you want, I can pretty much tell you word for word what you said, okay? All I'm saying is that the TIF was anticipated. You were aware of the
I was
TIF in
aware.
December of 2018. Is that true or not?
That's true. I was
Thank
aware
you.
of the TIF. I was
Thank
not
you.
aware of the master development that you had planned.
And yet we showed you the entire concept plan, and your response specifically was, "Wow, this looks great to me." So I think that's really not the point at this point, but the TIF was anticipated from day one, okay? Ms. LaBarber is opposed to the TIF, which is why we're applying for the CRA.
You've never, maybe it's not good form to be talking to each other, I'll talk to the board. It's my understanding, based on the records, and I attended almost all the meetings like you have too, that Capital Investment never did officially, formally apply for a TIF. The normal process is, after they gained the zoning approval from the Board of Trustees, the next step of several would have been to formally apply for a TIF.
So,
So they never really did that
I mean,
formally.
that's correct. They never really applied formally for a tip, but you want to address that, Greg?
Yeah, we had been told at the PD hearing approval meeting by Mr. LaBarber that he would not support a TIF. Based on that, we made the decision to apply for a CRA instead of the TIF, and that's exactly what we've done subsequent to the PD approval.
Question, if I may,
Yes.
Mr. Bickford, about his slides, and actually about this map, a few questions. If the housing study's already been done by HCDC, did it include all of the alternative areas here where they made determinations of dilapidation of the housing in those areas?
So HCDC, from what they have told me, has just looked at the area in question, and I believe they've looked at the houses on Frolic.
All right. Second
I
question.
don't have the formal study.
You don't?
If the
Okay.
area expands, HCDC will need to, look at that as well, obviously.
Okay. Second question, your slides indicated that this plan requires a JED, a JEDD as well. The CRA law, if I understand it correctly, doesn't actually require that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but are you saying that the township would require that, or is that something HCDC has proposed?
No,
Because the
that's-
developer has to agree to that as well.
That's a township requirement, which is actually a requirement of the approved site plan that a JEDD be entered into. That's, that's how this is, that's how the revenue to the township will flow, is through the JEDD. Property taxes, as you know, are a sub-fraction of what the revenue the township receives on it. So, that would be a requirement from the township that this property be included in joint economic development district.
And if the alternative maps were chosen instead, including the residences, would they be subject to that JEDD as well, or would it be restricted to the commercial zone?
It's only restricted to the commercial entrance.
So,
And that's a discussion for the JED creation. The single-family homes would never be part of any joint economic development district. The rest of the site would be a part of that, and that's up for discussion and debate on when you expand beyond the commercial to the residential component, the multifamily component. That would just increase the bottom line revenue, but that's not a discussion for the CRA, that's a discussion for the JED.
Okay, and one other question, if I may. The developer indicated they would be using the abated tax revenues to pay for infrastructure improvements itself by CIG, but there would be parking, which would also be public, which suggests there would be public funding for that as well. Is there a proposal that's been made or suggested to provide public parking there that the township would be footing the bill for? Because what I've heard so far is this is a great deal for the township and doesn't cost us a dime other than foregoing future tax revenue.
There's been no ask for township direct funds for any public infrastructure, parking included.
and has the JEDD already been established?
It has not.
No.
Okay, but it was a stipulation, correct?
That's correct. It would be, the process would begin, once the project starts, then the development of the JEDD will be created.
Okay, and if we could get someone from HCDC, not ACDC, to come here and make a presentation, that would be wonderful. I'm not familiar with HCDC. I assume it's not a publicly elected body, but I've just never really heard of it.
What's the, I'm not sure of the process on this, so we would pass a resolution, it would go back to HCDC, would they have a public hearing on it?
No, so what would happen is, first off, you have to direct Doug and I how you wanna proceed. We would then craft local legislation that would be sent off to the county commissioners saying, either we're in support of this CRA with this stipulation or these stipulations, or we're not in support of the CRA. The county then can decide what to do with it. They're the ones that have to apply on our behalf, but they want local level input.
But my point is, after that process takes place, then do they have a public hearing on it, or they just proceed?
They proceed as a resolution.
So we could have HCDC come out and give us a presentation.
But that would already be done, it would be a done deal at that point. So the county commissioners do the majority vote, is that correct?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay.
Hey Greg, why is my house included in this all of a sudden, just all of a sudden? Does that mean my house is distressed?
No.
No.
You can expand the area beyond the distressed area. This is to give.
We could go anywhere we wanted to go with the CRA. The only reason I had suggested to put the entire street in there was to give some benefit to those people that were potentially directly affected by this development. That would be you. I mean, you've come here
Oh,
telling us that
believe me, I am.
you've been
Yes,
affected
yes,
by
yes.
it, so I thought it would be a good idea to include the entire street of Dunedin. So you have the opportunity to take advantage of the CRA in the event that you want to do some type
But
of.
my property's marked distressed
No,
then,
it's
right?
not.
It's not marked
No, it's not
No,
distressed.
okay, I'm just asking,
No,
that's all.
no.
Okay.
But it has to be residential then, for 15 years?
Yes, that's correct.
Because in Capital's own testimony, my property value, some of their examples were Hyde Park, where property values went up near their developments because people were speculating on commercial. So, because truly, my land value is gonna be, after they build this, not residential, it's gonna be if someone wants to come in and buy it for commercial, correct? I mean, I'm not gonna be able to change it to commercial
That's correct, for 15 years.
for 15 years.
That's correct. That's correct.
Is
But
that
at the same token, if people didn't wanna be in the CRA, then we wouldn't put
Right.
the houses in the district. This is
Correct, and we
a
have that
benefit.
opportunity.
If you choose to opt
Right.
out, you can
I know.
opt out.
I know, I'm
Yeah.
just trying to
Gotcha.
figure out what it does.
Tom, sorry,
It's all right.
River Valley allergies again. This is a big deal, and I don't wanna, I'm not, adamantly opposed to a CRA because I don't know enough about it. And I think most of the people in this room, and I'm pretty sure the trustees are having a little hard time wrapping their mind around this as a concept or as a substitute for TIF. Wouldn't it be wise if you somehow, before you took action to instruct Doug and Rob to write up a resolution, that you held some type of public meeting or hearing that this could be discussed, and a lot of these questions that we have today, which we don't have answers for, could be answered in a more deliberate fashion before you make a decision to send this back down to HCDC?
Well, if we direct our law director to prepare a resolution, we're not voting on it today. We're gonna vote on the resolution when it comes up at the next meeting, which will give us ample opportunity for us to have somebody come in to talk about, from HCDC to talk about it if they have the ability to do that, or they choose to
Will
do
the
that.
public be invited?
It will be at a public meeting.
Okay, that's good. And I think Greg said, maybe you repeated that, is that you can draft a resolution, but it doesn't become formal until you actually vote on it.
That's
So
correct.
the public